You need The subcommittee will come to order. I ask unanimous consent that the chair be authorized to declare a recess at any time. Without objection, so ordered. Good afternoon. This subcommittee covers sea power and projection forces. Today we will hear about the projection part of the portfolio. Before we do, I'd like to welcome, who's not here and already starting out bad, Mr. Nick LaLota from New York's 1st District. Our witnesses this afternoon are no strangers to this subcommittee, and I want to take a moment to thank you and your staffs for the hard work and your service to this nation. Although we don't agree about everything, you have gone out of your way to make yourselves available to this subcommittee, and I appreciate it. More than ever, projection forces play an important part in the growing threats around the world. I know saying that has become somewhat of a cliche, but I have never seen a threat as great as it is today. In the last year, I've literally been around the world, and I'm more concerned than ever. This subcommittee has two legs of the nuclear triad, and the air portion with our bombers and tankers has been and will continue to be an unprecedented era of modernization. I'd like to hear from the witnesses how we're going to balance the retirements of the B-1 and B-2 with the extensive modernization of the B-52 and the procurement of the B-21. Also, as you know, the recent Mobility Guardian exercise identified the lack of secure communication links with the Air Force's airlift and air refueling fleet. I know we always ask commanders to tell us what they need, and in this case, AMC took a lot of equipment to Mobility Guardian and identified what worked and what didn't, and what would get at the problem set the fastest. I'd like to hear your thoughts on the lessons learned from that exercise. Finally, I'd like to hear your thoughts on increasing air refueling capacity. Admiral Paparo, in his nomination hearing last month, said, quote, "I do have concerns about the ability of the joint force to refuel what will be a dynamic force operating within the AOR from bases on land." Before we introduce the witnesses, I'd like to turn to my friend, Mr. Courtney, and the ranking member for his opening remarks.
Well, thank you, Chairman Kelly, and thank you again to both witnesses for being here today. This is the first budget hearing of our subcommittee after the release yesterday, and I think you know we're on a very truncated schedule for NDAA this year, so we're pleased that you're here and early, and hope that we can again use time efficiently as possible to make sure that we have a good mark later in the congressional calendar. I would just say that that as we have done in past budgets, we will make some adjustments on a bipartisan basis. That's sort of the DNA of this subcommittee. And in terms of just some of the concerns that I would like to at least leave with you here today, I don't have to necessarily answer all of them this minute, but the order by DOD to lift the grounding order for the V-22 Ospreys and return to operations after the 3-month grounding is, I think, still an issue of great concern and high interest on the subcommittee. And we again really want to get as strong a message and feedback back from all the services that use Osprey in terms of just what is the precise, explicit plan in terms of trying to reduce risk for that platform. Trent mentioned the bomber program, which again I'm not going to belabor that. I think he articulated well, what I think we're going to be looking for, and then on the air refueling mission, pretty much the same thing that we're going to make. Continue to track the remote vision system, which we think we made progress. I think the subcommittee drove some of that progress over the years when Mr. Whitman was chairman back in the day. And lastly, the VC-25B program, the Air Force One, which is just sort of continuing to be an ongoing saga, and we're really want to see that hopefully get a real sort of end date goal that we can sort of talk to our constituents about, and hopefully put to bed a platform that's way past its shelf life. So again, I have written remarks which I would ask Mr. Chairman to be entered for the record, and with that I'll yield back.
Without objection. Thank you, Ranking Member Courtney. Introducing our witnesses, Mr. Andrew Hunter is the Assistant Secretary of the Air Force for Acquisition, Technology, and Logistics, and Lieutenant General Rick Moore is the Deputy Chief of Staff for Plans and Programs. I understand, Mr. Hunter, Secretary Hunter, you are going to give one statement, so the floor is yours.
All right, thank you very much, Chairman Kelly, Ranking Member Courtney, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, and thanks for having us here today to provide testimony on the Air Force's fiscal year 2025 President's budget request for our projection forces, aviation programs, and capabilities. As you know, the Air Force plays an integral role in many priorities in the national defense strategy, including defending the homeland, deterring strategic attack, deterring aggression, and building a resilient joint force. Our Air Force capabilities underwrite the capabilities of the entire joint force, and we're uniquely suited to provide this element of the nation's defense. It's particularly true for long-range strike and power projection capabilities that are purview for this subcommittee. The Department of the Air Force is ready to deter and prevail against today's threats. However, to maintain our advantage and improve our operational posture, we must continue immediate and significant capability modernization to keep pace with the growing military capabilities of the People's Republic of China. The Secretary of the Air Force has made clear that we are out of time. While this budget request continues to focus and build upon the modernization called for by the operational imperatives and cross-cutting operational enablers the Air Force identified last year, our resources have been limited by the 2023 Fiscal Responsibility Act. The Fiscal Responsibility Act spending caps increase our risk and force difficult trade-offs. Funding through continuing resolutions and restrictions on the retirement of outdated weapon systems also divert the focus from our military's ability to deliver decisive combat power. To achieve a more competitive posture for the great power competition that we currently face, the Air Force has undertaken several initiatives to implement important changes centered on how we develop people, how we generate readiness, how we project power, and how we develop integrated capabilities. These changes follow up on our operational imperatives work, which highlighted the challenges of integration and the importance of tight partnerships between the operational, budget, and acquisition communities. The organizational changes we're making at the Secretariat and within our major commands and at Air Force Material Command institutionalize our lessons learned from operational imperatives and other key efforts. And we look forward to working with Congress as we organize into a more agile and integrated acquisition system that delivers capabilities quickly and at scale. Let me turn to the request in our FY25 modernization portfolio. As our modernization continues, the Air Force is gradually transitioning the current 3-bomber fleet to a 2-bomber fleet of next-generation B-21s and modernized B-52s to provide nuclear and conventional global strike options for decades to come. Since I testified to you last year, the B-21 program has made significant progress. We are executing the flight test campaign, and there are several aircraft in various stages of build on the final assembly line. Our FY25 budget request also advances modernization for the B-52. It's the most extensive modernization on the platform's history. The commercial engine replacement program, the radar modernization program, will ensure the B-52 fleet's viability and improve its operational availability through the year 2050. Last fall, the B-52 SERP program transitioned from the middle tier of acquisition pathway, the rapid prototyping process, into a major capability acquisition or major capability or MCA, a milestone B for the program in 2024. The demand of global operations, as both the chairman and the ranking member pointed out, require a critical mass of air refueling tankers with specific connectivity, survivability, and agility capabilities, generating at mission-capable rates to meet timelines of the joint force and win the fight. Our fiscal year 25 budget requests RDT&E and procurement funding to continue uninterrupted tanker recapitalization. The KC-46A continues to provide operational readiness, flexibility, connectivity, and survivability to the Global Reach mission. To date, 139 production aircraft are on contract and 81 have been delivered to the warfighter. The Air Force continues to work with Boeing to correct deficiencies for the remote vision system and the stiff air refueling boom. We're committed to ensuring these deficiencies are properly addressed and without undue burden on taxpayer or on the operators. This budget requests funding for the procurement of 15 KC-46 in Lot 11 and associated support costs, along with the increased depot stand-up and the transition to organic sustainment that the Air Force requires. Our goal is to get to our required future tanker capability, NGAS, as soon as possible. Our tanker recapitalization effort is designed to ensure continuous tanker recapitalization between the delivery of the last KC-46 and the first deliveries of NGAS. With the decision not to pursue the KC-Y last year, we returned to industry with a new and modified requirement in order to get after KC-135 replacement with the requirement necessary for that aircraft. We've received responses from Boeing and from Airbus, and we are beginning to determine the acquisition strategy of the tanker capitalization program, which will be decided later this year, based on the information we received from industry. When we get to NGAS, it will deliver adaptive and agile platforms and mission systems as part of a tanker family of systems by the mid-2030s. The NGAS AOA is considering a wide range of designs, including clean sheet designs and purpose-built aircraft to address projected threats and needed capabilities and leverage the benefits of full and open competition. The NGAS AOA should complete in October 2024, and it'll shape requirements and determine the technology development timeline for the path ahead. We're also standing up a future tanker program office to execute both NGAS and tanker recapitalization effort. Our global operations also require strategic and tactical aircraft with specific connectivity, survivability, and agility, generating at mission-capable rates necessary to meet our timelines. Our 25 budget request includes funds to continue modernization and sustainment of our airlift fleets, including both the C-17 and the C-5, and also the C-130. Regarding executive airlift, the VC-25A program and Boeing successfully delivered the most recent aircraft to the Presidential Airlift Group on January 25th, approximately 2 months ahead of schedule in support of flight operations in 2024. So we're having good success with the VC-25A. Ranking Member Courtney, as you indicated, VC-25B, we're continuing to execute and work with Boeing to execute that program. The structure of our arrangement with Boeing, as you know, essentially prioritizes cost over all other considerations, and that has had an impact on our schedule. But we continue to work with Boeing to deliver that important capability later this decade. Sadly, last fall, the Air Force lost 8 airmen in a CV-22 Osprey mishap off the shore of Japan. As you indicated, safety and aircraft investigation boards have determined that a material failure of a component led to this mishap. And we need to do additional maintenance and procedural controls to mitigate that risk. We are committed to doing a resumption of flight operations in a way that ensures a safe return to flight with the appropriate training for qualification and proficiency for the air crews and the right maintenance and procedural controls. Our FY25 budget request continues development and modifications to increase CV-22 fleet reliability, capability, and survivability. And since time is of the essence in capability development, I did want to say a personal thank you to the committee for providing the Department of Defense with Section 229 of last year's NDAA, what we call the Quick Start provision in the fiscal year 24 NDAA. And we look forward to coming to you soon with information on specific initiatives that we will be seeking for the Department of the Air Force under this authority. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify, and we look forward to working with Congress and our many Air Force communities that support us to maintain our necessary military advantage, secure our vital national interests. Thank you.
And with that, Mr. Nick LaLota of the 1st District of New York has now joined us, the newest member of our subcommittee. Although he may have an accent, so we may need an interpreter, I will let him ask the first round of questions there, Mr. LaLota. You've got my time.
Thank you, Chairman. I see which way this committee is going to go with me. Appreciate that. Not only did I get the front seat, but I get the ridicule from the gentleman without the accent behind me. Special thanks to our witnesses for being here today and for allowing us to discuss the Air Force's Projection Forces program. The insights that you provide to our committee will be invaluable as we make our decisions on policy and on budgets. Today, I'm eager to delve into discussions on how the President's fiscal year 2025 budget will affect our operational readiness, especially as it relates to China and Russia, how it will impact our local defense industrial base, and how it will ensure the Air Force's continued dominance in the skies. Mr. Hunter, good to be here. Good to see you here, sir. You're the Air Force's top civilian for acquisition, technology, and logistics. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Excellent. Given your position and expertise, how will the Air Force's focus on competition with China and Russia impact its procurement of bombers, tankers, and airlift capabilities, sir?
Well, all of those capabilities are central to our ability to perform our missions in the Indo-Pacific region, so they are highly prioritized. We are working the acquisition community closely with our operational community. That's one of the key insights of the operational imperatives work that we did last year, that we are seeking to make a permanent part of our process as part of reoptimizing for great power competition. We're working very closely with the parts of the Air Force staff that are working on our force design, and they are, in effect, developing the concept for a new integrated capabilities command that will help ensure that we appropriately prioritize our requirements for that part of our force, that we do the right modernization and upgrades, and that we field the right systems in the future for air refueling and for airlift. And so we are working very closely with that community on the stand-up of the Integrated Capabilities Command to have a complementary set of organizations within Air Force Materiel Command to support that work, and then ultimately to build the systems that will fill out that part of our force design. And I know, General, if you want to speak to that as well.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Hunter, and thank you for the question, Mr. Lewis. So from the programmatic perspective, I would say all of these things are of great importance to the fight on China, as you have rightly pointed out. They sit, though, in balance with all of the other capabilities that it takes to prosecute war against a peer competitor. And so we have a lot of analysis in the past 2 years that lets us move beyond a discussion of platforms to a discussion of end-to-end creation of effects. And we can see clearly where we have advantage and where we don't. And so where we've placed our investment in this budget cycle is in the places where we may not have the best advantage, and we have not sought to over-invest in places where we already gain an advantage. So all things in balance and all things along an entire chain of activities that allow us to create effects.
Thank you. And General, I'm going to stick with you on this. My understanding is that you spearhead much of the Air Force's plans and programs. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And does your portfolio include the Air Force's LC-130?
It does.
Thinking about Russia and China specifically, I'm concerned because the United States relies solely, as I understand it, on the LC-130s operated by the New York Air National Guard and their unique ability for transporting personnel, equipment, and supplies to remote locations in the polar regions. And to accomplish this, I understand the LC-130s are specifically modified to operate in extreme cold and snow-covered environments. There are ski sleds, from what I understand, on these aircraft, making them the only large strategic aircraft capable of landing on ice and snow year-round in the world. So thinking about that part of the world and what that might be used for in strategic competition, at least with China and Russia, but certainly in kinetic operations, I'm worried about an over-reliance on the LC-130 while concurrently that fleet is being allowed to deteriorate. So I was wondering if you can comment, General, how does that current deterioration of the LC-130 fleet comport with our nation's strategic focus on conflict, possibly with China and Russia, knowing that that conflict may extend to where this LC-130 is used mostly?
Yes, sir. So it's a great question. Not to mince words, but I think they do matter. The LC-130 is aging, as is the rest of our fleet. 44% of the Air Force's fleets are past their design life, and the average age of our fighter fleet is nearly 30 years. I don't believe that the LC-130 fleet is deteriorating. Aging, I would think that that's reasonable. I don't believe that that fleet is deteriorating. In fact, there's been a substantial investment, thanks to the committees, in new engine mods, new propellers to give them more ability to function, particularly in the ice mission. So I think there also is an upgrade, by the way, for new skis, or modified skis to keep the airplanes relevant and to keep them current. They have something like 15, 20 years of life left in them. So we have, thank you to the committee for a small amount of money, to start an analysis of alternatives to look at what the replacement may be, but we don't view this as an urgent or emergent requirement. The aircraft, as I mentioned, are aging, but they are aging gracefully along with the rest of our fleets, and all things in balance, as I mentioned, this is not a place where we would view the need for urgent investment, but we are conducting an analysis of alternatives to see what it is that might be able to come next.
General, we'd appreciate if good, smart, strategic folks like you continue to keep your eye on it. Understand it's not urgent right now, but my experience in this town specifically is we should plan a little more ahead. And if 10 or 15 years is your horizon, that's good news. But I hope that you, your predecessor, and his or her predecessor does anticipate that need in time.
Yes, sir.
Great. I yield, Chairman.
I thank the gentleman for his questions. Now recognize the ranking member, my friend, Mr. Courtney.
Thank you, Chairman Kelly, again. And like you, I want to welcome Mr. Lalota to the subcommittee. I don't know what took him so long to get over here, but those Yankee fans, that's they're kind of slow learners sometimes. So anyway, thank you again to the witnesses. Just want to go back, Mr. Hunter, to the comments you made regarding Osprey, where, again, in your witness testimony also, you described the fact that, some new sort of maintenance and tracking, program is going to be put into place there. And I realize it's probably summer before they really are operational on a sort of a regular basis again. Has the Air Force or the Navy, who obviously is a big consumer of Ospreys, has this all been sort of put down in a document, in a reg? I really feel that would be a useful and helpful thing in the wake of that terrible accident. And obviously, it's not been the first time that's there. I mean, when McCain and Fitzgerald had the terrible collisions, I mean, the Navy, really put out a very explicit, document that we actually codified, in NDAA that sort of, just changed the whole system in terms of, releasing ships for duty. And if there was readiness issues that didn't comply with that, then, basically you hit the safety brake. And so, I mean, personally, I just feel like that the services really need to follow a similar model in terms of just, again, getting the public as well as families of the pilots and the crews to understand that something's different now.
Agreed, Congressman, and we do have very rigorous processes in place for what we do after a aviation accident. And the safety board recently concluded it's about safe operation of the platform. We also have the accident investigation board, which is a similar but separate process that comes up with long-term recommendations, both engineering and relating to the ConOps methods of operation and maintenance. That will, I'm sure, confident, will have recommendations for us that we will absolutely implement over the longer term. I know that since all of the services operate the platform in a slightly different fashion and manner based on our different mission sets, each service has its own path to carry forward about how to resume operations and do that in the safest way, tailored to our mission set. And I know General Bauernfein and his team are 100% focused on this. And I agree with you. I think we're very committed to communicating with the families of those incredible service members that we lost to ensure that they understand what happened, but also how we're doing to make sure it doesn't happen to others, put them in the same situations.
And I just want to say for the record, and I think Trent would agree, I mean, General Barenfeld was extremely accessible. I mean, we talked to him within days of the incident, and we had another briefing. So again, my comments really just about, again, we need to see something that, is explicit and public to really show, like you said, that, something's different and something's changed, and people really took it to heart. And I think that's what happened with McCain and Fitzgerald, and I think it's really, really shown impressive results. With that, I'll yield back.
Sir.
I now recognize the former chairman of this subcommittee, who is my mentor and always is full of advice, Mr. Whitman from Virginia.
Well, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Thanks so much for your leadership and for that of Ranking Member Courtney. You certainly have done an incredible job, and I want to thank our witnesses for joining us today. Mr. Hunter, I want to begin with you. As we look at where we go to counter the threat from China. We talk about next generation air dominance as a system that has to be put in place for us to be able to operate in the highly contested environment we're going to find ourselves in. As part of that, too, is next generation air refueling systems, because remember, we're going to be operating in, at the very least, a contested space, probably a highly contested space, so we have to make sure we have tanking that can also survive in that environment. You know, logistics becomes very important in that highly contested environment. I wanted to get your perspective and ask where you see next generation air refueling systems going. Are you learning anything with what's being developed in NGAD? And I understand a lot of that is classified, but hopefully one is informing the other. And I want to make sure, too, that we understand operationally how those two programs are going to intertwine, and how do we make sure that we don't get one out in front of the other, because I think one is intimately tied to the other. If you're going to operate with a next generation air dominance system, you better be able to refuel in that same environment and support that aircraft. We know how important tanking is. So what options are you considering to be able to hopefully get some of that capacity in place as quickly as possible? Obviously, 2027 is the metric. And are there options that we have to maybe pull NGAS to the left? I know we've looked at what we can do to pull a lot of those platforms and programs to the left because of the growing threat from China.
Well, thank you, Congressman. Really excited to talk to you about this. And I agree with your sentiments exactly. These programs are closely related, both in their concept, how they operate within the force design, and also I'm going to be pleased to tell you that in the way that they're functioning and the way that they're working together. I did want to note that the PB 25 includes $7 million for NGAS in order to complete the AOA, do some of the early stage modeling and simulation work that will support the AOA, and also stand up a future tanker program office that will manage both NGAS and the tanker recapitalization effort. So we do have funds in the budget. We look to add to that as part of our next budget cycle process to complete the work throughout the FITUP. The NGAS program is leveraging our NGAD program efforts. We want to leverage the government reference architecture for advanced mission systems developed by NGAD, which we intend to leverage across the Air Force force design, but in particular with NGAS. And they're also leveraging expertise from the Agile Development Office to help them get started and take what I call the next-gen approach to our acquisition programs with large vendor pools, continuous competition, and iterations of capability that we can deploy in a relatively good time frame. So subject to our ability to identify the right resources for NGAS, I would certainly favor, if we can't accelerate the entire NGAS program, certainly getting after some of the mission system elements, such as connectivity that the chairman referenced in his comments, into today's force on the earliest timeline that we can.
What's your vision concerning autonomy in those systems? You know, as we look at what the future battle space is going to entail, there are great opportunities, I think, to get humans out of the risk missions where actually autonomy can perform probably even better. And, you know, our most important asset are human beings. So our men and women in the Air Force, the Navy, the Marine Corps, the Army, the Coast Guard, you name it. That's our true asset. So give me your long-term visions about how NGAS is looking at autonomy, because to me, that's one of the areas where it makes sense. You know, if we're using ISR, if we're using logistics like tanking, it makes sense that be one of the first places that we look at autonomy. So give me your perspective on where NGAS is looking to incorporate autonomy as part of the future vision.
Yeah, I actually recently had the opportunity to fly on a KC-46 and observe how the crew operates, both in the flying of the aircraft and also with the boom operations. And I think there is a substantial opportunity to leverage autonomy in both areas of the airplane. Interestingly enough, one of my takeaways was that the RVS 2.0 is a key enabler for potentially a greater degree of autonomy in the refueling operation itself and the boom operations, because the greater clarity of the camera system will support a higher degree of high fidelity automation in that process. And it was noteworthy to me in the cockpit, there are times when, the pilots are, it's not that hard to fly the airplane, and then there's moments where it's really hard and they're task saturated. And those moments are areas where I think we could definitely leverage autonomy to reduce that burden on them, particularly when it comes to the dicier aspects of refueling operation.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. Now recognize Mr. Norcross.
Thank you, Chairman. This wasn't going to be a refueling hearing, but I'm going to continue it because Rob has certainly touched on a number of those issues. And I understand the environment we're speaking of, but can you, Mr. Arndt, give us a better view on what the current thinking for stealth technology? I know Rob asked a question of additional capabilities, but stealth for night and gas, where do you see that going?
Well, I think it's a huge element of the analysis of alternatives to look at what are the different technologies that can help us do refueling in a contested environment, and what are the different ways to solve that very challenging operational problem. So it's a huge focus. We're leveraging, obviously, the expertise of our force. We're leveraging modeling and simulation to help us think through what might work to help us enable that, and then what doesn't work. One thing that's a clear lesson that I do want to hit on again is a core foundation for all of it is situational awareness and the connectivity that's required to give the crew situational awareness in order to engage in higher risk operations and higher risk environments. And so that's something that we already understand, and our AOA will help us get after more questions such as the one you referenced about what other technologies can we bring to bear to help us operate better in that environment.
We certainly have a number of platforms that currently we have and have to be fueled, but looking to the future, there can be many types, and I'm not sure one size fits all, and that's one of the challenges. Can you tell me currently for the KC-46, if this was 2 years ago, I would say, what can it refuel? I think we're on the other end. What can it refuel currently?
There is a very small number of limitations. The most notable one is the A-10, and that it just relates, it's an engineering issue between the boom and that aircraft and its power of the engines. It's not impossible to do it. It's just not a particularly good idea to do it on a routine basis, and therefore we don't. And that's a decision made by General Minahan and his team at AMC, and that is working. We have enough KC-135s to ensure that we can safely operate A-10s wherever we need to.
And certainly the number of those is diminishing each year that we go through. The remote visual system, I'm not looking back, but where we are currently, the system that they are building right now has been approved, its design concept by the Air Force, correct?
Yeah, we are well along. So, the nature of the KC-46 FAA airworthiness certification. So we're still working with the FAA to completely nail down airworthiness certification, which will completely close approval of the design. But we have made a ton of progress towards that, and we are close.
We certainly have. The good news is we will have the greatest system the world has ever seen. The bad news is it took us a long time to get here, but looking forward. The question is, are we where we expected to be as of the final design that we're looking at? Are we still looking at a late 25 implementation?
There is some schedule pressure there, and depending on completion of the FAA airworthiness certification process, I cannot guarantee you that we would be in a position to field in 25. It may be 26, and that is actually likely. I think it probably will field in 26, but I can get back to you with a more detailed timeline for where we see the state of play of fielding.
Well, certainly we appreciate that, and considering what we have gone through on this tanker program, I think all of us can say is we're glad we're on this side of the hill, and it's going much better now. And with that, I'll yield back to Chairman.
I now recognize Dr. Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. just want to ask a real quick question. I know we hit on this already. It's kind of the importance of the CV-22 program and what's going on there. And we kind of, it was highlighted based on the recent groundings that we had on how important that aircraft is overall to all branches of the service. But I just wanted to ask a question. The CV-22 is the Air Force's only high-speed vertical lift platform in the inventory. It allows for long-distance vertical lift operations with increased survivability. When we talk about operations in the Indo-Pacific and really across the globe, speed and range are perhaps the two most important factors, and the CV-22 aircraft provides a capability that is nearly impossible at this particular point to replace in that regard. I know the Department of the Air Force has invested in the CV-22 nacelle improvement program, and it's greatly improved the readiness of the aircraft and increased aircraft availability by over 5%, and from what I've been told. Lieutenant General Moore, how has the nacelle improvement benefited aircraft readiness, and have you seen an increase in mission-capable rates? Further, is it your assessment that you have seen a decrease in the maintenance and man-hours and cost per flight hour within the CV-22 fleet thanks to the nacelle improvement program?
So we have absolutely seen a decrease in maintenance man hours. Largely that comes from increased engine time on the wing. Engine changes in the CV-22 are complex, as you certainly know. And so we have seen an improvement. This is paired with a companion mod that replaces a wiring harness in the same area as the nacelle screen, which is actually the part that we're talking about. That has helped as well. Nevertheless, the MC rates remain below what we would like. The maintenance man hours per flight hour remain higher than we would like. And we now have a fairly healthy task ahead of us to get our pilots back up to full mission status, and that will happen along a very deliberate pathway. But the CV-22 is still a part of our force. We intend to use it that way. We wish that the mods that we had put in place could have maybe potentially had more impact. I think we could have hoped for more, but we are seeing the improvements that you're talking about, maybe not quite to the extent that we would have hoped.
Great, yeah, I've been out there at Bell Helicopter, and I've seen the before and after, and it's pretty impressive in the change, and I can only imagine the impact it's having. I hope that we continue to do that on all of our B-22s across the services. My second question, real quickly, is during my time in Congress, I spent a lot of time focusing on our vertical lift capabilities across services and what that will look like moving forward. Many of you have heard me say this before, and when you were talking about Indo-Pacific, I think, and one of the reasons why the V-280 program, Bell's got that right now, is basically based on speed and range, and those are going to be really important in a future conflict, especially in a conflict in Indo-Pacific where those are going to be exaggerated. During my recent meetings and briefings, I've heard that while we have great capabilities now, we need to make a next-generation leap with regards to speed, range, and survivability. Development of the high-speed VTOL, the vertical lift takeoff and landing aircraft, is well underway right now to meet the critical needs of tomorrow. That's the plan, at least. But in my opinion, we need to quickly move into the next phase of this program. I understand that DARPA intends to move from 4 potential proposals to 2 or 3 in the near future, and I would urge that decision to happen sooner than later so that we can accelerate this program. I think that time is of the essence here. This new high-speed VTOL aircraft will need to have advanced features like runway independence, improved survivability, variable payload configurations to allow for increased mission flexibility, and superior performance over the legacy platforms, to say the least. Lieutenant General Moore, can you speak to the importance of speed and range for our projection forces capability and how this new high-speed VTOL aircraft will be part of that? And Assistant Secretary Hunter, I know this program lives currently in DARPA at the moment, but I've heard from many leaders and operators about how great this aircraft will be. So is there anything in terms of resources or authorities that this committee can do or provide to accelerate the fielding of this aircraft?
So we certainly value speed and range above most of the other attributes of a fighting force in the Pacific. You're certainly well aware of this when you fly from D.C. to Hawaii. You get very happy, not because you're in Hawaii, but because you're no longer in D.C., yet you are only halfway to Guam. This is an enormous area to fight in. Certainly speed and range are attributes that we value. We also, however, have to ensure that if we're going to bring on a new weapon system, that we have the headspace in the budget to account for that. And I think we're challenged to see something like future vertical lift come in until after the nuclear bow wave peaks. Sometime, we thought it would be 27. I think now it's probably 28 or 29. Before that, I don't see that we have a way to bring a new weapon system into the portfolio.
Thank you, sir.
I would say from an acquisition perspective, we do talk to DARPA and are in discussions with DARPA on how their high-speed VTOL program, they're looking for a service to take that program on when it reaches the completion of the work that they're doing. They work it up to a certain point, and then they expect someone else to carry the program forward. So no resolution as of yet in those conversations, but this is an area where we are working very intentionally with the force design that is directly tied to our vision for great power competition. And so this capability would be in the mix to understand how does our force design meet the needs of the fight and the things that substantially improve our capabilities, to reference what the general said earlier, right, that balance. Reinforcing an advantage or strengthening an area of weakness, then they're going to be prioritized in our force design. So we're really looking to our colleagues today in the A57 on the half staff, but in the future in the Integrated Capabilities Command to help us work through these prioritization questions.
Thank you both. My time is up, and I just want to say that with the Army's vertical lift program, I understand these new proposed capabilities are a leap, a big leap.
The gentleman's time's expired. Now recognize Mr. Garamendi. I'm sorry, Ms. McClellan, I'm so sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to you and the ranking member for having this hearing today. I do appreciate hearing from our witnesses on the ways that we can continue to ensure that the Air Force has what it needs to remain a truly global force. And with that, I want to start with a follow-up from Mr. Lillota's questions, and that is how the Air Force projection forces are ensuring that it maintains its nimbler counterinsurgency and counterterrorism capabilities if they are needed.
So, ma'am, I'll certainly say that we have not given up on counterinsurgency or counterterrorism. However, China is the pacing threat, and we are focusing on what it takes to execute an end-to-end operation that can create effects against a peer adversary. Low-end fighting is something that we've become very good at over the last 30 years, but it is a very different kind of requirement than confronting a peer adversary. Confronting a peer adversary is much, much more complex. It's much more intensive in terms of data and the ability to move it, as well as airmen to make command and control decisions. And if we're going to be successful in that arena, we have to focus on that. There are still parts of the Air Force, Special Operations Command in particular, will still focus on counterinsurgency and counterterrorism. In fact, Special Operations Command is the global integrator for that fight. Air Force Special Operations Command is their component. We'll continue to focus on that. But the majority of what we have will need to pivot away from that, and it will have to pivot towards high-end competition or conflict if called upon, or we won't be able to pull this off.
And the one area that I would highlight that we are doing some work on that is directly relevant is on the counter UAS, which is a huge priority across the department. No single service has all the tools required to really effectively perform that mission and all the different scenarios that you see that we require that capability in the Middle East. So that's a joint multi-service effort that the Air Force is participating with and with our service counterparts. And we bring certain technologies to the fight, the capabilities of the Air Force Research Lab, and that we've got some things that we can bring to that fight as well.
Thank you. And we are over 5 months operating under a continuing resolution, and I wonder if you could share how that has affected the Air Force's acquisitions, your ability to maintain your programs, and if there have been any delays as a result.
I'm going to let the general answer this one, but I can't resist the opportunity to just start on our collaborative combat aircraft program. With the advantage that that program was already underway, and so we've been able to execute a good portion of it, but we have not been able to execute the experimental operations unit, which will be helping us figure out the concept of operations for CCA. So we've lost time on a critical element of the program, which is really getting after the ConOps, and there's a range of other impacts. Rick, if you'd like to.
Yeah, we have absolutely lost time, and we've lost buying power, and we're not going to get either one of those back. It is imperative, I know that it's not the direct work of this committee, but it is imperative that we have a budget and that we have it on time. By far, the salient feature of our ability to progress is the ability to have predictable funding that arrives on time. The Experimental Operations Unit is a great example of one of the things that hasn't been able to start. It sits in a basket of capabilities represented by the Secretary's operational imperatives. The Secretary has been working on operational imperatives since he arrived, and yet nothing has yet been appropriated for it. We are still waiting for the first of those dollars to arrive, and we're giving time to our adversaries. Quite frankly, they don't have this problem.
And my last question, I don't know if you'll have time to answer fully, so if not, you can submit it for the record later. But Lieutenant General Moore, with Russia's continued aggression in Ukraine, increased cooperation and support of our European allies remains a top priority. And what has the Air Force done in 2024 to develop new operational concepts, deploy capabilities, and plan to bolster deterrence and maintain its competitive advantage against Russia? And what can we expect in 2025?
So we certainly, we would stop short of saying that we have participated in the conflict, but we certainly have followed the guidance of the administration and the Congress and provided assistance where we can. We have, I would characterize our impact as having helped Ukraine devise new ways of fighting. Quite frankly, they're moving very quickly. That battlefield changes about every 90 days, and they're moving very quickly. We have provided all of the assistance that we're authorized to provide without getting directly involved. And so largely this is a policy issue, and we are complying with both the policy and the public law that comes from the Congress.
And I would just add, in terms of defense of NATO, the air policing mission, U.S. Air Forces with F-35s and other platforms, but working in close cooperation with the European nations also operating F-35As. That cooperation has really been excellent. And we see the value of the connectivity of that platform in those operations.
Thank you, and I yield back.
Now recognize my friend, General Bergman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to everybody for being here. I'd like to focus a little bit on the Air National Guard for a minute here. Since the Gulf War, the Air National Guard has lost 24 fighter squadrons, and of the 81 squadrons in the Air Combat Command fielded as of January 1, 2023, only 25 were allocated to the Air National Guard. In Michigan, we're seeing this firsthand as Selfridge Air National Guard Base will be losing its A-10 mission. That's just a fact of life. We know these are tough decisions that have to be made. The FY 2024 NDAA included a provision encouraging the Air Force to commit additional procurement of the F-15EX above the program of record for the purpose of full recapitalization of the Air National Guard. The Air National Guard A-10 squadrons currently planned on losing, their A-10 mission. So, does the Air Force disagree with the Armed Services Committee's assessment and our committee's commitment to ensuring a robust National Guard? How do you, hate to say how do you feel, but, what are you thinking about the future of the Air Guard?
So we are committed, the Air Force is committed along with the committee to a robust Air National Guard. If you look at the percentage of squadrons at the beginning of Desert Storm that were allocated to the Air National Guard, particularly in the fighter world, and you look at the percentage at the end of this fight-up, they're roughly the same. So there's been a concurrent drawdown of the combat forces in the Air Force over those several years. At the beginning of Desert Storm, as you well know, the Air Force had about 150 fighter squadrons, and we were nearly 600,000 people. That is nothing like the Air Force that we have today. So it's not a lack of commitment to the Guard. It's that the Air Force over the last 30 years has simply gotten smaller. I would also say that in terms of the F-15EX, you mentioned Selfridge specifically. If F-15EXs were to go to Selfridge, they needed to have been bought at least 3 years ago and maybe 4. And our ability to add aircraft beyond what we have procured right now, the program of record, as you know, is 144, and we're simply not able to reach that. In fact, you'll see in our 25 budget a reduction of 6 aircraft in the budget year. So we have no complaint about the Fiscal Responsibility Act, but the fact of the matter is it reduced our top line, and so it would not be likely that we would see the ability to add additional procurement. An F-15EX is about $3 billion per squadron to procure and bed down. And I think it unlikely that we will see additional F-15EXs in the Air Force's budget.
So
in
let
the
me
near
ask you a
term.
question. Does that mean there's the potential for further reduction in the number of fighter missions for the Air Guard?
We don't see that. We have looked very carefully. In the A-10 enterprise in particular, we replaced fighter missions with fighter missions where we could. When we ran out of fighter tails, we replaced fighter missions with flying missions, which is what happened at Selfridge. And if we weren't able to do that, then we replaced fighter missions with a relevant, high-end future force mission that would result in a transition we would not have to talk about again in our lifetimes.
Okay, on a different subject, the President's budget calls for the Air Force to divest 250 aircraft, which will, my understanding is put the Air Force total below 5,000 total airframes. Is that a correct statement?
The first number I'm familiar with, I'm not sure about 5,000, but it sounds about right. I'm not familiar with that number, though.
Anyway, the budget also falls below the Air Force's stated goal of at least 72 new fighter jets annually by about a dozen jets, so about from 72 to 60. Why the disconnect, and what is the plan? Are we going to ramp up procurement so we can get up to the number that was originally requested, or why the difference?
We would like to do that. Our top line was simply lower than it was in '24. And consider that when we open the books, whether the top line changes or not, because of workforce supply chain inflation, there's about a $10 or $12 billion bill across the FIDEP that we have to handle. And we are still committed to those airplanes. We believed in them last year. We believe in them this year, but they don't fit in the top line. They don't fit in the top line anymore. It's unfortunately, it's that simple. I wish that it were different, but it's not.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
If you didn't want those KC-46s in Michigan, we will definitely take them in Mississippi. With that, yield questions to Mr. Garamendi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Wow. This is an extraordinary hearing. We need this, we need that, we need vertical lift, we need aerial tankers, F-15Xs, we need $3 billion a copy. Hypersonic, I just left the hypersonic missile hearing in the other hearing room. F-35s, I think special operations came up here. Joe reminded me that his two subs are now one sub, and so two sub Joe is now one sub Joe. My question really is for you, General. You recently made a statement. When asked about the Sentinel, you said the Sentinel will be funded. We'll make the trades that it takes to make that happen. General Morse said at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Can you explain the trade that the Pentagon, we will make so that the $130 billion Sentinel program over the next 10, 15 years will be built? What is that trade? What are you trading off?
Sir, I don't know that we know the answer to that yet, but what we do know is that Sentinel is a national imperative. There have been multiple nuclear posture reviews over the last 20 years across a range of administrations and across a range of...
Stop. We've heard that. So you're not going to tell us what you're trading for the Sentinel?
So we don't know the magnitude of that trade yet, so I couldn't tell you what the trade
Well,
would be.
basically, it's $130 billion over the next 15 years. That's basically what we're going to spend on the Sentinel.
So, Congressman,
Mr.
this
Hunter,
is...
do you know what the trade is? Your colleague doesn't know what the trade is, although he's willing to spend $130 billion on the Sentinel.
This is part of the Nunn-McCurdy review process to
That's
do
correct.
exactly what you're describing. So that process is underway. And obviously, the first determination is, does Sentinel continue or not? That's a question that Dr. LaPlante will decide.
No, that's not the first question. That's the end question. The first question is, what's it going to cost?
There are five
the first
aspects of
question.
the review, and they
That's correct.
ultimately come together to the question of whether the program terminates or is continued. And so that, we in the Air Force are, obviously, we're contributing to the discussion with our understanding of
You
the
are
program.
central to the discussion. It is your program.
But OSD is runs the Nunn-McCurdy review process, and so
At
they
the
are
end.
leading that, and we are we will take their decision and then execute that when it's made.
No, you will be, no, listen, I reviewed this rather extensively. I know the process. The process starts with the Air Force and the justification of the cost issues. All right? That's where it starts. And then from there, it moves on to what is the alternatives to spending the money on this? Is it hypersonic or is it something else? I know the process. It begins in your wheelhouse and specifically with you. And General Moore,
So
you've been bold enough to say you're going to do the Sentinel regardless, and you'll make trade-offs. I want to know what your trade-offs are. Which one of the programs that have been discussed here by the members of this committee are you not going to do so that you can do the Sentinel?
Sir, we don't know that yet because we don't know the magnitude of the trade and we don't know the shape of
Well,
the bill.
you know it's $130 billion. That's the current number.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Hunter,
We don't know how much of that is within the FIDEP or how much of it comes in the out years. It's a 30-year number, actually, that you're talking about.
in fact, you do know most of that. Mr. Hunter, how are you going to go about giving us an honest, complete answer to the Nunn-McCurdy, or are you going to take what the general just said, regardless? We're going to do it because it's been said for 20 years that it's 40 years, 53 years that we've had to have a triad, period. And it is, in fact, a religious issue, having very little to do with the world in which we're now living. So there are going to be trade-offs, Mr. Hunter.
there are.
And they're going to be first an understanding of the cost, and then an understanding of the trade-offs, and then ultimately, yes, it will be in the secretaries. But I will share with my colleagues here, that this is ultimately a question for the Congress. How are we going to spend the precious resources that we allocate to the military? Are we going to spend it on the Sentinel, or are we going to spend it on vertical lift, or any of the other things that this committee has raised today? With that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Now recognize Mr. Alford.
Well, thank you, Chairman Kelly and Ranking Member Courtney. I'm honored to represent the only B-2 bomber base in the nation with Whiteman Air Force Base in our district, future home of the B-21. Last year, the chairman and I visited Palmdale, California to see the B-21 firsthand, an incredible visit to learn more about our next strategic bomber and how it will project American air power across the globe. B-21 is a critical piece of our effort to deter China and will be the backbone of our bomber force. This program has stayed on target, and I remain committed to working with my colleagues on this very committee, the appropriators, and both of you to ensure that it does stay on track. I've also been in constant contact with General Bussier. We are excited about the Raider coming to Whiteman Air Force Base. Considering China's rapid military buildup, we cannot afford delays to programs like the B-21. We need the B-21, as you know, to counter China and bolster our bomber force. Secretary of Defense has prioritized China as DoD's #1 pacing challenge and called for development of new capabilities and plans to bolster deterrence. How will the B-21's role do this by deterring communist China? Let's start with you, Mr. Hunter, and then go to the general.
Well, Congressman, you said it well. The B-21 is the backbone of our bomber force, and in particular, it brings both the strategic deterrence and the conventional long-range strike capability that we need in our future force design. And in particular, it's the combination of range, access, payload, and the weapons capability that constitutes that payload that allows us to go anywhere and perform the missions the nation needs against anti-access threats today and the ones that we project in the near future and in the midterm future and in the far future, that the B-21 has the capability to give us the access that we need in all of those environments. So it's absolutely core to maintaining our both our strategic and our conventional strike, long-range strike capabilities going forward.
General, let me ask you a separate question. Head of Strategic Command General Cotton recently said during testimony he would love more than 100 B-21s. Can you talk about what that means? How many do we actually need to deter China?
Yes, sir. So how many we need to deter China is an interesting question, but the fact of the matter is the 100 aircraft threshold, the decision point with lead time accounted for to go past 100 is not until the mid to late 30s. So the commitment right now is to 100 aircraft. That takes us for procurement into the late 30s. The decision whether or not to go past that may very well not be based on China because it will be made at a time when we don't foresee the security environment and we don't need to. This is not a decision that needs to be made now, but it is one that we need to continue to think about. General Cotton has probably the best insight of anybody on this, and certainly on active duty, he has the most experience, both in depth and breadth. So his counsel is well taken. We just haven't come quite to the point that we need to make this decision yet.
I want to switch gears since General Bergman brought up the A-10s. You know, we have the 442nd at Whiteman Air Force Base, proud fighting men and women who love this mission, love a fighter mission. It does not look good that they're going to have another fighter mission there. Everyone I ask won't give me a straight answer. You've kind of answered a little bit about that today. What's the odds of 442nd ended up flying the B-21?
I think the odds that the 442nd winds up in a global strike mission are very high. I think the odds that that includes the B-21, I think if we were given odds, we'd say that that probably is something reasonable to have a thought on. I don't want to get in front of the Secretary. Basing decisions are made by the Secretary, but I believe that we will be able to have a flying mission to replace the A-10s at Whiteman as long as we are able to keep our current procurement on track. I think the odds of that are pretty good. We have a view of the 26 top line, and it does not look any better than 25. So we'll have to be cognizant of what the procurement profiles look like going forward.
In relation to that, staying on track, how concerned are you about the inflationary pressures, the disruptions that would impact the ability to make the necessary investments and meet the production ramp that we're currently on?
I'm very confident we can meet the production ramp that we're on for B-21. There are inflationary impacts, and you've seen evidence of that. The government has cost control in the near years, and so that is an element of why I'm so confident in our ability to do the production ramp that we have planned. But those inflationary costs do have an impact. Where they don't come to us, that means they affect the industrial base, and that has longer-term implications for the health of the industrial base, and those problems often turn up on other programs.
Thank you both. I'm out of time. I yield back.
I now recognize myself. Even though you showed up late there, Mr. Alford, I still let you get in. Mr. Hunter, in your written testimony, you write near-peer competitors have made significant advancements that threaten today's tanker fleet and potentially forces them to operate further away from their area of responsibility. The stacked demand of global operations requires a set number of air refueling tankers with specific connectivity, survivability, and agility capabilities. How would the KC-135 recapitalization program and next-generation air refueling system, or NGAS, get to these requirements, and what is the timeline for each program?
So our KC-135 recapitalization effort is really focused on ensuring we have continuous tanker production. That is the objective. And so, in effect, speed to ramp is core to that program, because the necessity to begin production to ensure the right delivery time frame for those systems is relatively near term. Having said that, we are interested in having connectivity as part of the KC-135 recapitalization effort, and that is part of the requirement that we've been in dialogue with industry to understand what can be done there, and in fact, we can do much better than we have in today's fleet as part of that effort. NGAS, connectivity is core to the NGAS concept, among other things, but it's absolutely one of the core elements. So, and we are able, as I talked about a little bit earlier, to leverage the work that we've done on advanced mission systems architecture to help us ensure that that connectivity can be baked into the design. And again, our approach will be to work with a large number of vendors, many of whom will specialize in mission systems, including connectivity and communications.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. And Lieutenant General Moore, this committee has heard from numerous stakeholders that there are not enough air refueling tankers. How would you respond to them? And I also want you to include, we have the Washington Air National Guard, which has the mission but no planes. I would think with the shortage of fuelers that we could get some KC-135s to our friends in the Washington Air National Guard so they're not using someone else's tankers. So if you would respond, how do we respond that we don't have enough refueling tankers.
Yes, sir. So I think refueling capacity is something that in any fight will be enormously valued. It's part of how we have built our overall fleet structure. I don't believe that this shortage is more important than some of the others that are addressed. What you see in our 25 budget are investments in the long-range kill chain. We can see from analysis, we can move beyond platforms and weapons to a look at what it takes to create effects from end to end. And of the most pressing shortfalls that are in that end-to-end creation of effects, tankers are not amongst the highest priorities. They are absolutely a priority. I would also, not to mince words, but they are important. The Washington International Guard does have tankers. They are part of a wing that has tankers. It's not that they're using someone else's. It's that they have a group of tankers that are apportioned to both parts of a total force wing. So I don't think it's any more realistic to say the Washington International Guard doesn't have tankers than to say that the 92nd Air Refueling Wing doesn't have tankers. They both do. We would oppose any increase in this fleet based on the prioritization that we see in other mission areas, but we would strongly oppose growing the tanker fleet in order to support a single unit so that they can have their own airplanes. That would not be a priority for us.
I would just argue, I've heard this fleet management crap a whole lot in my life, and I'm just going to tell you it doesn't work. Number one, we don't manage aircraft well that we don't own. And I truly mean that. A unit should own its aircraft. Maintenance, flying, and all those things, we do well what we own. We don't pay attention to things that are fleet managed or otherwise. And with that, and I appreciate your response, General Moore, I really do. Mr. Hunter, I want to recognize you for I keep going back between Mr. and Secretary. I don't think either offends you, but if you have additional comments, now's the time to make them.
Sir, neither do offend me. I did want to reiterate the thanks from the support for the committee for the Quick Start initiative. I think it really gets after how when we identify new priorities, and they do emerge on a regular basis, right? The threat is a fast, rapidly moving element of the security environment. And so we need the capability to respond quickly. The committees work with us to create that authority is absolutely essential to us having the ability to do that. We intend to come to you shortly with some of the initial initiatives there, and I think you'll see that it is what we described to you as our need, and I hope you'll be able to support us on those.
And thank you. And General Moore, I wasn't trying to be rude, but I've seen AMC and other people try to do the fleet management, and I can just tell you when that happens, what happens is the National Guard and Reserve get the short end of the stick, and they get the broke or old stuff, and the active duty gets the new and shiny stuff, whether that's through utilization that is measured by different metrics. And so it is something that I hope y'all will consider. And with that, this hearing is adjourned.